Hello, everyone. Good morning, and depending on where you are in the world, good afternoon, and perhaps even good evening, because we appreciate that we may have participants not just in the US, but across the globe. And we all want to thank you for joining us for the webinar, Studying in the US as an International Student, Staying Informed and Empowered on Immigration Issues. I'm Amy Flatten, and I'm the Director of International Affairs for the American Physical Society. And I want to acknowledge my co-organizers that you see on the screen there. Julie Davis, Federal Relations Senior Associate in the APS Government Affairs Office, and Shanaz Sulaimanovich, Senior International Programs Manager in the APS International Affairs Officer. So shout out to them. So we are so pleased to bring you this webinar, and I'm especially pleased to introduce you to someone that we have worked with a long time, Francis Slakey, our Chief External Affairs Officer. And he's going to give you some background on why APS felt it was so important to organize this event and bring us all together to talk about these issues. Slake?
Yeah, thank you, Amy, and welcome to everyone. As Amy said, I'm Francis Slakey. I'm the Chief External Affairs Officer for the American Physical Society. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the American Physical Society, we actually have members in more than 115 countries. So as a global organization, we closely follow policies in the United States that might impact our international members. And I know right now, visa policies in the United States are creating challenges for students, challenges for scientists who want to come to the United States and study here and do research here. And for those of you who are in the US right now, I expect that many of you are facing uncertainties and you're also facing challenges. So my mother came to the United States in her 20s. She came from Ecuador to start a new life here in the United States. And I know her story, but I can't know exactly how all of you feel. But I can say that APS is doing all it can to address the challenges that you might be facing so that you can focus on physics, focus on your studies, focus on your research. So at APS, we're doing three things. We are advocating in Congress against harmful visa policies, and we're promoting alternatives. We are pushing back in the federal courts, standing with our international students, and we're providing information as best we can to help all of you navigate the visa policies in the United States. And it's that last point, providing information, which is why we're here today with Dan Berger. He is one of the nation's leading attorneys on immigration issues. He's going to be talking about the landscape of visa policy in the US, and then he'll be taking questions. And then after the webinar, you'll get an email and it'll have a link to a survey. Please fill out the survey because the information in that survey is actually going to help inform the work that APS does, the work that we're doing to push back on harmful visa policies, the work that we're doing to support all of you so you can focus on the physics that inspires all of us. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Francis. I'm not used to calling him Francis. He goes by Slake. So I was about to say thank you, Slake. But as Slake said, there'll be an email sent to all of you with a survey, and please take that survey. But we also want to emphasize that in that email, there will be a link to an International Student Resources webpage. Please keep that link and keep checking that webpage because it will continue to be updated with resources that we believe you will find valuable. In addition, the webinar will be posted on that webpage in case any of your friends or colleagues couldn't come today and want to see what we said. But it's my pleasure now to introduce our main event, our main speaker, Dan Berger. And he has a long list of professional credentials, but I want to highlight a few things about him that I think would be of interest to you. Dan developed his interest in immigration when he was in college at Harvard. There he studied immigration history and taught English to adult refugees. He graduated from Cornell Law School and has practiced immigration law for over 25 years. So, along with leading the academic and medical immigration team in his role as a partner at the law firm of Green Spiegel, he also is on the legal advisory board and the board of directors of the President's Alliance on Immigration and Higher Education. Likewise, he advises the Talent Mobility Fund on STEM immigration issues, and he's a frequent writer and speaker on immigration and has co-edited an updated edition of Immigration Options for Academics and Researchers. So as Slake said, during his remarks, Dan's going to address many of the questions that you submitted during registration. And then after Dan's remarks, we'll begin some Q&A with Dan, where he can answer some of your questions that are submitted today on the Zoom chat, or others that were perhaps submitted during registration and may not have been addressed earlier. So Dan, we genuinely want to thank you for being here today. And now let me hand things over to you.
Very good. Thanks, Amy. And hello, everybody all over the world. And thanks to Francis and all for hosting this event. I just wanted to say up front that the format that we've all put together is really trying to be as efficient as possible. There are many questions, and with your pre-submitted questions, Amy and I and others at APS have organized the questions into topics, and I'm going to try to get through as many of those as I can and be as responsive as we can to what you would really like to know. We will also have some time at the end for individual questions that you can share in the chat, and then the APS folks can read those off. Again, I do want to say, because I believe this is being recorded, that today is November 5th, 2025. Things may change by the time you watch this, but I can tell that I know that APS is committed, and we're committed to trying to get you the most up-to-date information so you can make good decisions as you go along. And on a personal note, I've really enjoyed being part of a non-scientist part of the APS community. I got to go to your annual conference in Anaheim and spend time with 14,000 physicists, which was a really interesting and exciting opportunity. So just for big picture, before we dive into the questions, I wanted to just explain for all of you, whether you're here in the US or coming to the US, the role of the international offices at colleges and universities in the US. Colleges and universities have international offices. They're called different things, visa office or international office, but they have people who are trained and authorized to advise you on F and J visas, particularly on international student issues. They should generally be your first, the first place you go for information. And absolutely, we all get too many emails. I know email is a little bit more of a regular for my generation than maybe for yours, but read anything that the international office sends you. They are on listservs, they are tracking information, they're sharing the latest trends, and it's really important that you follow their instructions to get the very latest. There is some good information that I know international students get on Reddit and Facebook and so forth, but you really want to be listening to your international offices, and also understand that they are not, in most cases, they are not lawyers. So they can't give legal advice about anything that is beyond what they're doing. So if it's a question about the F1, how do I qualify? Can I get OPT? How many courses do I have to take? That's your international student advisor. Anything beyond that, I'm getting married to a US citizen, I have a previous arrest, I'm traveling and I'm stuck in a security delay. The international student advisors may not be able to ask that, because that could be considered unlawful practice of law. And so there is this gap in the middle where you have the things that the international student advisors advise on, and then you have things that lawyers can do, but in most cases there are no free legal services for students. And so you have a gap in being able to get information. And I'm really pleased to, and I think that the APS team can tell you more, but to say that APS is developing a website to try to bridge some of that gap. And also the Talent Mobility Fund is creating an international student resource center, which is going to include access to attorneys through email, Q&As, and so forth. So there's a real effort this year, and what I think is a very exciting effort on multiple fronts to try to get you as much information as possible, especially when things are moving so quickly and you really want to have good information. I'll say also that and that International Student Resource Center website will be launching during International Education Week, which is the week of the 17th. So stay tuned. I'm sure there'll be a lot of outreach about that. All right. Well, with that, let's dive into your questions and get through as many of those as we can. So the first question is about what is going on with duration of status, or DS, and will that hurt your chance of getting OPT or other things? Let me explain this, because it's a little confusing. Usually, if somebody comes to the US in a temporary status, like a tourist or an H-1B worker, you have an expiration date. So usually tourists are given 6 months, H-1Bs are 3 years. Students are different, and for decades, students have not been given a fixed expiration date. It says D/S, which means duration of status, which basically means you can be a student as long as you're a student, including OPT. And as you can imagine, I've met people who went to high school here and college here and got a PhD here, and they've been here an awfully long time as an F1 international student. The reason why there's no fixed end date is sometimes students change programs, sometimes they they extend their program, but also sometimes the program is faster or shorter than you might think. So I have had people who come here for a PhD but decide just to get a master's. I've seen people who need a little longer to finish their program because they change majors and they need some extra time. So basically, in the past, the college or university and the academic advisors were the ones who decide if you're making reasonable progress. The government, US government, is worried that people might just come here as an international student and stay and just try to drag that out as long as possible. That's the university's job to decide if your reason for taking longer makes sense. Do you need some extra time because of the kind of preparation you had before? Is there a medical issue that means you need a little extra time? And that's an academic decision. The US government has a proposed regulation now to change that, and to basically say that instead of letting the university or the college decide, that decision would be made through filing an application with a fee to the Immigration Service and letting an immigration officer decide. I'm oversimplifying a little bit. It's a very long regulation. There are lots of pieces to it, but in effect, to me, that's the biggest change. And there was a 30-day comment period that ended recently. And during those 30 days, there were over 21,000 comments. And it was very interesting to look at those. Many organizations, scientific societies, higher ed organizations, economists, business organizations, and so forth, submitted comments. And not just we like this or we don't like this, but very detailed, data-driven comments that analyzed why this was not a good policy. It also adds an extra delay in the middle of a program or before applying for OPT. So this is what's happening. We think that the final regulation, so what happens in the US is if a regulation is proposed, there's a comment period, the government thinks about the comments, and then they issue the final regulation. We think that the government may issue a final regulation this year. And if that happens, then I can't guarantee you of too many things these days, but I can guarantee you that there will be a lawsuit basically challenging the government for not carefully considering those 21,000 plus comments. It's hard to go to court and say the government can't do this, but there is a much stronger argument to go to court and say the government did not do this carefully, properly, thoughtfully. And we've been told by people at the Department of Homeland Security that it usually takes 9 to 12 months to really consider carefully that number of comments. So stay tuned. It is possible that this duration of status will be blocked. Certainly a variety of different organizations are considering getting involved in this litigation if it happens. It won't happen until the regulation is dropped, but stay tuned on that. Now, if the regulation goes through and for some reason the court challenge is not successful, then it will add an extra layer, an extra application and a fee before getting OPT or before doing any kind of program that's longer than 4 years. But I do think that there will be a powerful challenge to this duration of status rule, and I hope that helped to explain a bit. Okay, just getting through some more questions about visa status and maintenance, which really seem to be a big part of what you all were asking. How can students maintain their F1 visa if their program gets extended? So I think this is a good opportunity, again, to take a step back and understand the difference between a visa and status. So a visa is a visa stamp is what's laminated into your passport. It has your picture on it, and you get it at a U.S. consulate, and that is a travel document. So that's what gets you into the U.S. And if it hasn't expired, it's what can allow you to travel outside the U.S. and come back. Canadians don't need visa stamps. Citizens of every other country in the world do need that visa stamp. Status is your immigration situation in the country. So it's possible that you can come into the country with that F1 visa. That visa expires, but your status can be extended by your foreign student advisor by issuing a new I-20, and you never need to get a new visa unless you decide to travel. I have people some of my clients just don't travel for a variety of reasons. Okay, what's the best way to remain in status while being afraid to travel back to our home country for renewal? Reasons why it might be hard to travel back would be a potential security delay for people from certain countries. And again, you can stay in status. Work with your foreign student advisor. Make sure your SEVIS record is up to date. SEVIS is the computer database that's used to track foreign students. And you can stay in status even if your visa has expired. Okay, let's see here. What happens if a student's SEVIS record is terminated? So the question is about terminated accidentally or on purpose. So your SEVIS record, this is what the government sees. So the Department of Homeland Security manages the SEVIS database. It was created after September 11th, 2001, as a way of tracking F&J visa holders. And if there's a mistake, then if it's terminated accidentally, then let your foreign student advisor will work with you to request what they call a data fix. That could take a little bit of time, but that's doable. We did see earlier this year a situation where some SEVIS records were terminated and then revived through a court case showing that was not done properly. We can talk more about that. But again, anything related to your SEVIS record, you really want to be talking directly to your foreign student advisor. I've been doing immigration now almost 30 years. I've never seen a SEVIS terminal. I've never seen the SEVIS database. I'm not authorized. Only your foreign student advisor is authorized, and they're the ones you need to work with directly. Okay. What happens if a student graduates but hasn't applied for OPT yet? Again, this is a great reminder that read the emails that your international office is sending. In most cases for F1 students, there's a window of time to apply for OPT. It's up to 90 days before your program end date or 60 days after. So if you've just graduated, there may still be time, but most likely your international student advisor sent an email 6 months before you were graduating saying, here's the OPT filing window, here's how to do it, and follow that. And there's a little bit of strategy involved here. If you have a job that's starting right after graduation, you probably want to apply as early as possible. If you don't have a job yet and you want to extend your time a little bit, you may want to think about doing that later. Sorry to repeat myself, but talk to your foreign student advisor and get some information about how long OPT is taking so you can make a good strategic decision. Okay, what's the difference between reinstatement and reapplying for a new visa? So this involves a problem with status. So there are a variety of ways that there could be a problem with status. Let's say you're for some reason you're not able to continue in school for a period of time because of a medical issue, and you can get a medically reduced course load. But if you're just not able to be in school for a period of time, or you go back to your home country to help family for a family emergency, then you may need to reactivate somehow your student visa record and your CVIS record. If you're in the US, then that's called reinstatement, and there are specific rules for it. You need the recommendation of your foreign student advisor. That could also involve a situation where you have unauthorized work and you need to reinstate your status. The other reinstatement works, but it can be slow. If the other way to move back to F1 status after you've been in F1 status is to leave the US, apply for a new visa abroad, and come back with a fresh F1. And that will be, again, a judgment call about how long reinstatement is taking at the moment, how expensive it is to travel, what the risk is of travel, and when your program is finishing, and so forth. Okay. All right. If a student changes a major, does it affect their CVIS record or visa validity? No. In the US, you can change your major. I think it's, the educational system is a little more flexible than in some other countries. So yes, you can absolutely change your major. Let your foreign student advisor know. If you need extra time because there are extra requirements to finish that new major, then you'll want to talk about extending that program end date. What's the best way to extend stay for dependents under F2 status? Okay, so, and this is an example of where, excuse me, international student advisors are able to support you. They're going to be a little bit more limited in what they are allowed to say for supporting family members. So they can certainly give advice. Your family members will get a separate I-20, which is a form that authorizes international student status. If you're in F1 status, the F1 and F2 can be extended simply by your foreign student advisor updating the I-20 and giving you a new signed copy. If you're applying for OPT, again, your family members don't need to do anything there. If there is a point where you're changing, let's say you're in another visa status right now. Let's say you're working on an H-1B and you're going back to get an MBA, then you would need to file a change of status from H-1B to F1, and your family would have to file a separate online change of status from H4 to F2. Hope that answered the question. And how will I stay in status while waiting for H-1B lottery results? So there is something called cap gap. H-1B is, as you may have heard, is one of the most common professional temporary working visas. It's a natural fit sometimes because the H-1B is for a job that requires a specific degree in a specific field. So if you have a degree in physics and you're working in physics, that could potentially be an H-1B working visa. H-1Bs working for private companies go through a lottery that's held in March every year. And if you're waiting for you don't have to wait very long for the lottery results. They're much more efficient than they used to be. So usually within a week or so, if you're applying in your last year of your program, you'll have some time. But Otherwise, if let's say you graduate in January and then the H-1B lottery is in March, you may need to either change to a tourist visa or do something to stay if you want to stay in the US while you're waiting for those H-1B lottery results. If you are selected in the H-1B lottery, then the company has your employer has a 90-day window to file an actual H-1B petition for you, and it doesn't begin until October 1st. So again, for those who are on F1 status or OPT and who are moving to H-1B, you will need to work with the company, with the employer that's filing the H-1B to come up with a plan for that transition. But when I mentioned cap gap, that means that your F1 status can be extended in some cases up to October 1st when the H-1B would begin. It's a little hard to explain this, but again, this is what your foreign student advisor is there to do to help you. Okay, let's talk a little bit about work permission. And in general, I just want to explain big picture that the F1 visa was created years and years ago. You know, back in the 1960s, 70s, there were F1 international students. At that time, the government was particularly concerned with people coming here on a student visa and working on the side. So somebody who was barely going to school, but delivering pizzas or delivering Chinese food. Nowadays, and so the F1 student visa has very limited situations in which students can work for that reason. It's a different world now, and there are a lot of other reasons why somebody might want to get work permission in order to be as part of their student. So for example, there are a lot of entrepreneurial programs that are at many different schools. It could be that being part of an accelerator or working on a startup is actually part of your educational experience. It could be that working for a professor's company may be an interesting educational experience. So there are a lot of reasons in the modern world why experiential education can be valuable. So I think you want to think in general about three different kinds of student work authorization. One is on-campus employment. That means you can work for up to 20 hours a week on campus. Again, clear it with your foreign student advisor. That could be working for a professor. It could be working in the dining hall, whatever. A second category is called CPT, Curricular Practical Training, and that's where you're getting course credit or you're doing an internship for credit. This is commonly used for summer internships. This is used if you're doing a special studies with a professor to do some kind of research project. CPT is really something that's part of your curriculum where you can get paid, but it makes sense as part of your educational program. The third one is optional practical training, OPT, and that's used after you graduate. You get a year to start, and then in STEM fields, there can be an additional 2 or 3 second and third year that has some extra requirements. So with that big picture, let me dive into your questions. Okay, how difficult is it to find a job after recently graduating with a PhD? Okay, well, that obviously depends on what the PhD was in, and you know, I think the career offices at your schools and the career mentors at APS can give you more advice about what the job market looks like for the particular kind of physics that you're doing. However, in general, we find, and I think most career offices would agree, that the best kind of job search is personal. If you graduate, you're about to graduate and you apply for jobs online, likely there are going to be other US workers applying. If they get a few good people and some of them don't need visa sponsorship, it's going to be easier to hire them. However, while you're in school is an amazing time to network. So, and again, I know APS can be a big part of this. They have all sorts of support for you in doing this. Try to do internships, unpaid or paid. Try to actually go to your professor's office hours and talk to them and get to know them and see if they have former students who are doing things that you find really interesting and talk to them. Go to the alumni office and ask them and tell them what you want to do. Like, I want to work in Omaha, Nebraska, and I'd like to be doing experimental physics of a certain kind. they can run a search and you can do informational interviews with those people. So the bottom line is universities are wonderful places to network. APS is a wonderful network of other people in your field. Talk to them. If you spend time while you're in school making those connections, then you are very likely to have a more personalized job search, or maybe to get hired after an internship. And in that case, you are much, much more likely to be offered visa sponsorship. We see all the time where somebody who is where you apply for a job at a company, the ad says we don't sponsor, but you look up and you see that they have sponsored people. The people they're sponsoring are generally people who they have some connection with before, either through networking or through internships. All right. Okay, updates about OPT and STEM OPT extensions. No specific updates now. There has been some talk among various government officials and on the regulatory agenda for Homeland Security about cutting back the OPT program. That hasn't happened yet. I know that higher ed organizations and scientific societies are watching this very, very, very carefully, but there is nothing yet except ideas and proposals. Okay. Let's see. If the employer doesn't respond to CVIS verification during OPT, what happens? Okay, so this is really important. When you are doing OPT or an H-1B, it's very easy as an international student to think, oh, I really want the job. I just want to do everything for the employer. I want to make this as easy as possible for them so they keep me and sponsor me. I understand that. However, the employer really does need to be engaged. STEM OPT and H-1B involve various promises to the government, to the Department of Labor sometimes, and also to Homeland Security. There can be site visits, in-person site visits. So I think it's not that hard. I've worked with a lot of employers. I've done a lot of H-1Bs. I've done a lot of STEM OPT. It can definitely be done. But you do want your employer to be engaged, and you want them to understand what's going on. You want them to understand what their responsibilities are, and you want them to take it seriously, because the last thing you want is to have a site visit and somehow the employer hadn't updated your job. Maybe you got promoted, maybe you got transferred to another location, and then there's an issue. So work with your foreign student advisor, work with your employer to make sure they really are engaged in this. And they do need to have some minimal level of buy-in to make STEM OPT and H-1B work. Okay, what are the most common reasons for OPT denial and how can they be prevented? Honestly, the most common reason for OPT denial is getting the dates wrong. It's really important to coordinate this. If you file a day late, you have a 60-day window usually after graduation or after your program end date. If you file on day 61, there is no way to save that OPT application. So don't wait till day 59 to file and hope that overnight mail works, or even an online filing. Do it a little bit early. And also your I-20, when you submit an I-20 with the OPT application, that needs to be dated within a certain period of time before the OPT application. So I would say the most common issues with OPT are getting the dates wrong. And so read the instructions carefully, ask your foreign student advisor if you have questions. Okay. Can we switch from CPT to OPT during the same degree? Generally, yes. Every program is different. So I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound like I'm just repeating myself over and over again, but ask your foreign student advisor. As you can imagine, like a nursing program has a lot of OPT. It's a big part of training to be a nurse, to be in a hospital and working. So there's a lot of CPT for nursing programs. A theoretical physics program may have very little CPT, and different schools look at this differently. So check in, but it is absolutely possible to do CPT and then OPT. Is unpaid work allowed under OPT? Yes, for the first year. So the first year of OPT, you have to be doing at least 20 hours a week. in a job that's related to your field, but it could be paid or unpaid. For the second and third year of OPT, it does need to be a market rate salary. You do need to be an employee. Okay, what happens if your OPT work card arrives late? If your OPT work card arrives late, you cannot start work until it arrives. You need that card in your hand to fill out an I-9 form to start working. So again, try to plan out based on how long OPT applications are pending to make sure you get the card when you need it. And think about, a lot of students move when they're graduating. And so think about where that card is going to be sent. Is that a stable address? Some universities will allow you to use the university address as a stable address to get the card. So you may want to consider that, because the most frustrating thing is when they send it, the card is approved, but they send it to your old address. It gets returned to the immigration service. It takes a while to get resent. You want to avoid that. Can OPT students work remotely for an employer located outside the US? In general, no. So OPT is supposed to be optional practical training. It's training. So you do want somebody here in the US. The employer would probably have to set up some kind of branch here to do that. Okay. Are there rules regarding multiple jobs during OPT? Again, during the first year of OPT, it's pretty flexible. You can, as long as you have at least one job that's at least 20 hours a week, you can work other jobs in your field, as many as you want. For the second and third year of OPT, every single job has to be at least 20 hours a week paid with a training plan on file, and that employer must be registered for something called E-Verify, which is an employer government database. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think a couple of these I've already answered by going a little beyond the questions that were asked. Okay. In terms of travel, reentry, and safety, that's another category of where we saw a lot of questions. Okay. What's the current situation for visa stamping delays abroad? Okay. It's starting to get a little better. There are two things that happened in 2025. One was that there's a new policy that says that you have to go to your home country. If you're a dual citizen, you may have a couple of options to do the visa stamping. That can be awkward. Let's say you're a German citizen, but you're in college in Denmark, and then you want to come to the US to do a PhD. In the past, it would be no problem to do your visa interview at the US Embassy in Denmark. Now, they seem to be saying they want you to go back to Germany, which is creating it's creating backlogs in certain countries, especially India, with so many people coming to study in the US. So I would say that situation is relatively new, and the other thing that the government has done is to limit the number of people who can get waivers, who can just do a Dropbox, who can basically drop off their passport, get the visa stamp without actually going into the embassy in person. Because everybody now needs to go in person, that's creating a backlog too. I think this is working itself out slowly. It was a problem toward the end of the summer, but now we've got some time before next year. So what I would say is book your visa appointment early. If you do want to do it in a third country, maybe wait another month or two and see if there's some update on this policy. But book your visa appointment as early as possible. Try to book it at the beginning of your trip, and try to assume that it could take some time. Sometimes, if your last visa took a few days, it might take, I hope it will still take a few days, but we are seeing overall slower processing. And there's always a risk when you're going to get a visa stamp, because it could be there could be delays. Things can happen. The machine that laminates the visa into the passport could break, and that could throw everything off for a week or so. So plan ahead, book your visa appointment ahead, and try to book it at the beginning of your trip so that you have time. And don't do it when you're on a short trip. If you're just traveling for fall break, I just think that's probably too fast, and maybe wait and do it over the summer or over winter break. Okay, let's see here. What are the risks of traveling outside the US while a change of status is pending? Well, the risk is that that change of status will be denied. So let me explain what that means. Let's say, again, you're on an H-1B visa, you're working in the US, and then you want to go back to school. You can file by mail a change of status from H-1B to F-1, but if you travel while that's pending, the change of status part will be denied and you'll have to leave and go to an embassy to get a visa stamp. So coordinate that. Try to think about the timing of your travel. And if you're going to be traveling anyway, maybe you just want to skip the change of status and apply abroad. You could also just stay here while it's pending to make sure that you don't lose that change of status. Okay, what happens if a student is denied reentry at a port of entry? A couple things here about a port of entry means an airport or a border. So you're coming into the US. When you're coming into the US, even if you have a visa stamp, even if you have an I-20, even if you've been a student for a while, that airport or border officer does have the right to make a final decision about whether to let you in. And if they're concerned about something, there could be delays. So I guess I have two pieces of advice for you. One is be consistent. I can't tell you how important this is. If they don't have time to look at everybody. JFK Airport in New York has 3,000 people arriving per hour sometimes. But if they happen to, let's say, do extra vetting of every 50th person, if they Google you and they see that your LinkedIn profile looks different from the employment history you filled out at the consulate on that online form, or looks different from the resume that's on your laptop, they might wonder what's going on and wonder if you're telling the truth, and you could get hassled. So just be consistent. If you're presenting your employment history or your educational history to the government at one office, be consistent, do it the same at other offices. Have your online profile, whether it's LinkedIn or whatever, be consistent with that, and just be ready to explain that. So that's number one, just be consistent. Number two is to be aware that the US government is now doing more different databases are talking to each other. It's interesting. I remember going into an immigration office about 10 years ago, and there was one guy who's about my age who was in the back who had this one computer that looked like an old Apple computer that I had from, when I was in high school. And there was a one database, and he was the only guy who knew how to do it. And that was the only computer that could do it. The technology at these government agencies is not great. And databases really weren't talking to each other. That's changing. And so now it is possible, and we do see this sometimes, that an officer at the airport can really easily pull up your file from the US consulate abroad. They can pull up old files. They also interact with law enforcement databases. And sometimes they can see something, but they can't tell what it is. And so if you want to avoid a delay, if you've ever had any interaction with law enforcement anywhere in the world, be ready to document that and explain it. And this means even if it was a mistaken arrest, even if the charges were dismissed, even if a lawyer or a judge told you you'll never have to mention this again, it's going to be expunged, it could show up when these databases start talking to each other, or when they use AI programs to search law enforcement databases. So be ready, and talk to somebody ahead of time if you're not sure if this is going to be an issue. But even if you've never been asked before about an interaction with law enforcement, it's a good idea to be ready, have documents. Honestly, if I'm an officer at an airport in the US, and you show up and I look in the system and it says that you were charged with a violation of Illinois code number 51-4, I'm not going to know what that is. You want to make their life as easy as possible. So just be ready with that documentation. Okay. How How can students prepare for visa interviews to avoid rejections? Again, be ready to explain any interaction with law enforcement. Keep your answers short and simple. And this applies at airports too. Consular officers at US consulates would tell us that they do 80 interviews a day. I find that hard to believe, but really good people tell me that that's really what it's like. So they're not, if you give a long answer, if you're sort of stumbling and you're not ready to explain something, that's going to be a problem. They want to believe you. So be ready to explain in really simple words, just a few sentences, what you're studying, why you want to study it, and what and keep it simple. Like really stick to 1 or 2 sentences, because if you say too much, then they're going to get confused. If we want them to think your case is the simplest thing in the world, and if you give a long answer and they think it's complicated, the officer could deny it or put it on the side of her desk, and it could sit for a while. So again, just be ready to tell your story. Like, why are you doing this? How does it fit into your career path? What are you studying? And these officers are not shy. If it's not enough, they'll ask you follow-up questions. Okay. Okay, what supporting documents should be carried when re-entering the US? The key documents for an international student are the signed an I-20 with an updated travel signature, which is the form from the university, the passport, and unless you're Canadian, the visa stamp to get back in. If the passport expires while you're studying in the US, renew it. For some countries, it's not possible to renew, but definitely try to plan ahead and don't let your passport expire. All right, let's keep going. And hold on just a second. Okay. All right, thank you. So let's see here. Financial and so funding issues. So are there scholarships available for international students? Fewer scholarships. So basically most US government scholarships and financial aid programs are not available to international students. You have to be a green card holder, an asylee, refugee, or a citizen. If there are, however, private foundations, and most financial aid offices have lists of this. So if I, let's say, I make a lot of money, my family sets up a foundation, they give money for whatever they care about. Some private scholarships do give out money to international students, and also some schools give out money. And I think in general, I'm not a financial aid expert. Definitely talk to folks at APS for advice, or to the financial aid office at a school you want to apply to. But sometimes a private university in the US may have a higher tuition, but may have more money available for scholarships. So it is possible. Okay, can you work part-time outside the campus for financial reasons? Or what, and this kind of connects to another question, what happens if a student loses funding mid-program? In general, as an international student, you do have to show that you can afford to be here without working. Now, again, you can work 20 hours a week on campus. You can try to get CPT. There is something called economic hardship. So if you had a plan to pay for school, but then you get here and the economy crashes in your home country, or your family's economic situation changes dramatically, a parent loses a job, something like that, you can apply for economic hardship, which is extra work permission. It may take time, but it is a possibility if there's a real need. It's not something you should come to school planning to do. Okay. What are the financial consequences of dropping below full-time employment? Well, the financial consequences would depend on whether on the tuition agreement and how far you are in the semester. But international students are generally supposed to be full-time students. There is no F1 visa for part-time students. There are some situations if, for example, you can get a medically reduced course load if you break your leg and you just can't take, you're out of class for a while and you can't take as many classes, or and there are some situations where you're finishing a program, like at the end of your PhD, you might be able to do a reduced course load. But in general, F1 students are supposed to be full-time students. If you're not able to be a full-time student, you may not be able to continue to be here on that visa. All right. And this is a great question. These are questions about institutional support, like what can colleges and universities and scientific societies and others do to support you? There are a variety of things. I think the mentoring that is done is really important, and I've said that a couple times, whether it's APS or at your school. I also did want to share, and I'm just putting this in the chat for everybody, and the Institute for Progress has a website of information about STEM immigration, and they have two links on there. One, they basically say the same thing. One was written for scientific societies, this one was written for universities. And this is basically advice for mentors about how you can help international students in STEM fields prepare themselves for success in the US immigration system, particularly in the subjective categories. There are a variety of visas, and like an O1 temporary visa, there are a variety of green cards like extraordinary ability, outstanding researcher, national interest waiver. There are a variety of different immigration categories that are based on marketing you, on showing your accomplishments in the field. And if you prepare ahead of time, you can do better in those categories. You can keep those categories open for yourself. So for example, let's say this happens sometimes. Let's say you're a graduate student and a journal sends an article to a professor to review. And the professor gives you the article and says, this would be a good learning experience for you. Go ahead and draft a review for the article. And then the professor sends it in. Now that happens, I think, under NSF mentoring guidelines and others, and I think, and also to help the student be ready for success in the immigration field. What that professor could do is let the student send the review in his or her own name, or send it in with both names on it. And there, you've now created a piece of evidence that the student can use in marketing herself in the future for immigration. Another thing is encouraging students to give talks at conferences, or to help organize sessions at conferences, or to be named on grants. So if I'm a PI, I'm a professor and I have a grant, if I have people doing pieces of work on the grant, let me make sure I'm mentioning them in the grant reports and in the grant application specifically, and not just paying them out of that grant. Being mentioned on a competitive US government grant, or on any kind of competitive grant that is funded, is a piece of evidence that can be used. So anyway, take a look at this, share it with your mentors. If there are any mentors in the call, take a look at it. And it will give you some ideas of ways to support younger researchers, whether they're postdocs, students, etc. Okay. All right. Let's move on to visas after graduation. So employment pathways. So some people who finish an academic degree here may, even if they work on OPT, may not want to stay here, may find a job somewhere else. However, there are a variety of other visa types, and the ones that there seem to be most questions about: the H-1B, the O-1, and the J-1. So let me explain each of those quickly. The J-1 is an exchange visa, and there are a lot of different subcategories. People who work at ski resorts, visiting scholars, all sorts of things. Specifically for this purpose, for you all, the J-1 research scholar category can be used for up to 5 years to work in a job that involves applied research. So it could be at a company, it could be a postdoc, it could be any kind of job that is sort of related to research. And it is a little confusing to look through the government website on this, but there is a website that was put out. It's I um, I just shared in the chat, and that I think was it basically took the data from the government website about these J1 opportunities and tried to make it a little more user friendly. So that's out there in the chat. J1s, I think in the past, most J1s were done in the at universities. I think now more and more we're seeing J1s being used in industry for people who are doing some version of applied research. The J1 does not require a lottery. It does not require a fixed salary. It is good for up to 5 years. And it is an interesting tool in the toolbox for us as immigration lawyers. The H-1B I mentioned earlier is for a job that requires a specific degree in a specific field. That is, I think for people in STEM fields, that tends to be really good. If you're an engineering major and you decide to go into the business side of engineering, it may be a little harder to get an H-1B. You may need to, or if you go into sales, you may need to show why you need that technical background to be able to get the H-1B. Colleges, universities, nonprofit research organizations all are exempt from the H-1B lottery. They can sponsor as many H-1Bs as they want. Most nonprofits, I think if they're thoughtful about it, can also be exempt. There are exemptions from the H-1B lottery for jobs that involve some kind of public-private partnership, or that involve some kind of work that's related to a college campus or a nonprofit research organization. You can also have concurrent H-1Bs. So if you have a part-time H-1B at a college, you can have a full-time H-1B without going through the lottery at a company. However, anybody who's just working at a private company does need to go through that H-1B lottery. A lot of you have probably heard about the $100,000 H-1B proclamation. There was a lot of confusion on that originally. Honestly, the proclamation wasn't terribly well written, but it's now clear that it only applies to people who are coming to the US straight as H-1Bs from abroad. So if you are studying here now, or you're coming here to study and then you change to H-1B later, the proclamation does not apply to you. There are two very big lawsuits involved challenging the proclamation, and personally, I think it isn't legal, but we will. So it may the $100,000 fee may not continue, but I think from what I understand of who's on this call, this will not apply to you because you will likely be changing to H-1B status here rather than applying from abroad. And then the H-1B is good for up to 6 years, so that gives you a time to evaluate green card options. And if you get far enough in the green card, you can even extend the H-1B beyond 6 years. The other category that there seem to be several questions about is the O1 visa. The O1 is a temporary working visa like the H-1B, but it is subjective. Like the H-1B is usually the first one we look at because it's pretty simple to say, you have a physics degree, this job requires a physics degree, there you go. The O1 is involved with marketing you. It's one of the ones I talked about earlier where you're trying to show that you've made a contribution to your field, that you've published, that you've given talks at conferences, peer-reviewed for journals, and so forth. So the O1 is something you can work toward in the future. The O1 does not have a 6-year limit. It does not have a wage required. It does not have a lottery. And it's a much more flexible category for people who might be doing maybe working for a small company or an entrepreneur. If you want to have a day job, but also run your own company, the O1 can be more flexible. Okay. And then I did also want to mention just quickly, even though there weren't questions about it, just so you know, there are 3 other categories that I think can be, again, tools in our toolbox. One is free trade agreements. The US has free trade agreements with Canada, Mexico, Chile, Singapore, and Australia. There are visas that are kind of like the H-1B, but don't have the same kind of lottery that may be available to citizens of Canada, Mexico, Chile, Singapore, or Australia. You also have the L visa, L as in Lawrence, which is a transfer visa. So a lot of larger companies will use this. So let's say you work after graduation for 3 years, you do your STEM OPT, you haven't gotten the H-1B lottery, or maybe you change jobs and so you only got to try once. If you are transferred abroad and work for a year abroad for a company, they might be able to transfer you back on an L1 visa. Again, the L1 does not have a lottery. It does not have a wage requirement, a specific salary requirement. And the L1 also, unlike a lot of visas, allows a spouse to unrestricted work permission. So, and sometimes it can be a career development opportunity to work abroad. So the company can try to coordinate with you to find a way to make this really interesting. And then last, there is an E visa. E is an elephant. And this is, the US has treaties with various countries that allow you to work for a company that is owned by people from your country. So what does that mean? It means that the US has a treaty, for example, with Bulgaria. So let's say I'm a Bulgarian citizen. There are two ways I might work for a Bulgarian company in the US. I could set up my own company, and I'd have to be at least a 50% owner, or I could work for a Bulgarian-owned company, maybe that I find out about through my networks. I appreciate Julie helping me send these links. This is a list of treaties that the US has. So if you're a citizen of one of these countries, you might be able to work for a company that is at least 50% owned by people from your country. All right, let me take a look here. Okay, and what are the new wage requirements for H-1B applicants? So this, again, this is a proposal. This has not happened yet, but the Trump administration has proposed changing the salary requirements for H-1Bs in the lottery. So not for H-1Bs that are applied for outside the lottery, but what they're saying is you would have a better chance in the lottery if you have a higher salary. Now, I think one reason why this is being done is to try to get at what the government feels is a problem with some big IT contractors. I think there's a concern, and I don't represent these companies, so I can't really, I can't really speak to it, but I think there's a concern that some big IT contractors especially are hiring H-1B workers, paying them a relatively low salary, and that's hurting US workers. So to get around that, and that's the same idea with the $100,000 H-1B fee. It's the same idea with raising the salaries on the H-1B. There are other ways that this could be done. The H-1B rules already allow companies that use a lot of H-1Bs to have extra regulation. But anyway, right now it's just a proposal for the next lottery in March to say if your salary is particularly high, you have a much better chance of getting the lottery. I think that will be, in fact, I know that will be challenged also. The government, again, has the right to do that. There are some things where the government is just doing something they don't have the right to do, like the $100,000 fee. I think they probably have the right to do this, but it really hurts startup companies. It really hurts companies that want to hire previous interns. So, because often your first job after you graduate is not necessarily a high-paying job. But if you do internships with a company and they want to hire you after graduation and keep training you, that pipeline is really very, very important. And we want to make sure that, and I think that's the problem in my mind. I don't speak for APS, obviously, but in my mind, I think that's the problem, is to make it harder for recent graduates to, or for people working in small companies or startups that maybe aren't able to offer the high salary right away. And for those of you who are interested, I'll just share a link from a recent National Academy article that talks about that pipeline and how it works in the United States and how important and how powerful it is. All right. I think we've gotten through the pre-submitted questions, so I'm going to ask my APS colleagues to help me look through the Q&A and see what else we have.
Thank you, Dan. And yes, like you said, we're going to move to the Q&A, and our Julie will be reading some of those out from those that have been submitted while you've been sharing your expertise. Julie?
Yep, thank you, Dan. So I think the first question, we're going to maybe bounce around some of the topical areas you've covered. But can you please explain the new rules about OPT extension employment wait list rules? I think they're referring to EAD. And just if you could expound on that, how it might be relevant for this audience.
Sure. Well, I think, anything related to OPT is very relevant to this audience because OPT is a great way for an employer to hire you, get to know you, for you to get some extra experience, and then move forward in the job market and think about employer sponsorship. In terms of, I think OPT has not changed yet this year. I think that's really important to say. There are many, many proposals for how to change it. Everything from a bill that was introduced in Congress to get rid of OPT to the duration of status rule that I talked about, which would add an extra delay and fee and application process in extending your F1 status to get OPT. But in terms of wait lists, there is no change yet. There are a lot of proposals. We're watching all of them. I know you're watching all of them, and we'll just have to wait and see what happens. But I do think there's, I'm just speaking for myself, but I think OPT, for the reasons that are mentioned in that National Academy report and for the reasons I've mentioned, has been around for almost 50 years. It's a very powerful, and actually F1 students have been around it hasn't been around for 50 years. It's been around for decades, but it is a very established pathway, and I think there is going to be a lot of pushback in efforts to try to change or limit OPT.
I think the question was more on the termination of the EAD, the automatic authorization.
Oh, okay. So I'm sorry. So I answered the wrong question. So this is that does not affect OPT. So basically, when you if you have your first year of OPT, you get a work card that's good for 1 year. And then when you apply for, if you're able to apply for a second and third year extension, that's the STEM OPT, your work permission is automatically extended while you're waiting for that card to come in the mail, the new card. There are some changes to automatic extensions of work cards, but it does not apply here because you're basically moving to a different category. You're moving from OPT to STEM OPT. So thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so the next question, can the government terminate F1 based on a student receiving a stop sign violation or speeding tickets, even if it was resolved in the court?
I mean, no. And the government did some things like that earlier this year. There was a point, I think it was in May, or maybe April, when over the course of a few weeks, a few thousand people, and keep in mind there are over 1 million foreign students, and this was a few thousand people, but it was still very serious for the people it happened to. There were some students whose F1 status was revoked because of law enforcement interactions. And to me, it seemed like kind of AI run amok. I think what happened was, again, they developed a new tool that cross-referenced law enforcement databases and immigration databases, and they just, without looking at it, they seemed to start revoking people where there was where there was an overlap. And I did have some people who had speeding tickets and other things. That was challenged in court very quickly and very successfully. Within about 3 weeks, everybody had their F1 status revived, and I hope that won't happen again. I think it's okay, I think, for the government to cross-reference different databases, and I think we can be pretty sure that's going to happen more and more in the future. But you need to then look at what it is, and if it's a serious crime, that could have immigration consequences. A parking violation, a traffic violation is not an issue unless it's something really serious. If you're driving 110 miles an hour in a school zone, that may actually be a crime, but not a regular parking ticket or a speeding ticket.
All right. So if you are applying for a tenure track role, say at a university after your degree, and get accepted for the role, will you need to apply for the H-1B through the lottery system?
No, the colleges and universities do not have to go through the lottery. Oh, that was kind of nice. I think that was the first question that had a really nice, simple answer. I like that.
Yes, always nice, right? Okay, so next, maybe a little more complicated. Given the new requirements around social media and needing to be public for visa interviews, what are some recommendations to follow about content that is shared on social media?
So I think there are two answers to this question. What one is that I do just have to say that it bothers me personally that that you have to think about this. I think in general, the United States, the First Amendment of the Constitution allows free speech, and you should be able to say what you want in the US. However, there is this new social media vetting. Honestly, I haven't seen very many people be affected by it. I'm on a lot of listservs. People who have problems tend to come to lawyers. So I don't, we learn exactly what works and what doesn't work by having people be successful or not successful. And I've had very, very few people be questioned on their social media. I will say, I think part of that is a recent court case, and maybe you can help me share this around, where the American Association of University Professors sued, basically saying that it's not right, it's not legal, it's not fair for your free speech to affect your immigration status. And there was an old judge, a Reagan-appointed judge, actually a very conservative judge, who issued a pretty strong opinion there. So I think the bottom line is I haven't seen a lot of issues. I would say what they tend to, I think honestly, even though it bothers me to say it, if I were thinking of applying to school in the US, I'd probably limit what's on my public-facing social media in terms of being very political, especially about the Israel-Palestine situation or about other things that the Trump administration seems particularly interested in. I would, but again, I haven't seen, I think until we have more problems, until we have more people getting rejected, we won't know exactly what works and what doesn't. I'm hopeful personally that lawsuits like this will help limit the effect. But keep in mind, social media is not only a tool to look at your political speech, it's a tool to look at you as a person. So if you've been an F1 student for 3 years and you go home for a visa appointment, and your social media shows that you were teaching karate lessons on the side, and you didn't have work authorization to do that, that could be a denial of your visa. Like, they can use social media to cross-reference and see whether you've done anything you shouldn't do, or whether there's anything on there that's different from what you put in your consular visa application. So keep in mind, I like to look at people's public-facing social media. I like to Google my clients before they travel, before they apply for something, to make sure that everything is consistent.
Excellent. So the next question, I haven't received my PhD admission yet, but I plan to apply for an F1 visa if I get accepted. I'd like to know if my partner can come with me while I'm studying, or does she have to be my wife or enrolled in her own program to stay with me?
Okay, so the US does not have specific domestic partner visas. So I'm not encouraging anybody to get married until they're ready, but if you are married, then that person could come on an F2. If your wife is able to get into her own program or get a working visa or some other kind of visa, she could come on her own. But there is a very, very limited category where you can use a B2 tourist visa for a year at a time for a household member to join you. So that could be, let's say you have an adult child with a serious disability who lives with you, who wouldn't normally qualify for a dependent visa, or you have an elderly relative you're taking care of, and I've done this for domestic partners. It's not guaranteed. There's no work authorization that comes with it. It's only a year at a time. But you can try that. If you're not married and if your partner is not able to get his or her own visa, then you could try that household member. But it is somewhat discretionary and inconsistent.
So then we have some questions around differences between different visa types and what a type is. So could you explain a little bit about the E1 category, and then what is the difference between O1 and EB1?
Okay, so somewhere back here in the chat, you'll see at 11:01, you'll see that I think there was a link that I shared that has a list of countries that have e-visa treaties with the US. These are business treaties. So if you're a citizen of one of those countries, then you can consider, I mentioned you could work for a company that is owned by people from your country. And there are two subcategories. One is investor and one is trader. So that company either needs to have some money invested in the US, usually, I would say $100,000 is really the minimum. And you'll see this around. If you spend time in the US, you may see gas stations, convenience stores, laundromats run by people from other countries. Sometimes those are e-visas where they've invested some money, they've started a Subway franchise or a Dunkin' Donuts franchise or a convenience store, and that's a 5-year renewable visa that allows a spouse to unrestricted work permission. That's investment. So that's the treaty investor. That's usually at least $100,000 in investment. The E1 is trader, and that involves showing that the company is trading goods or services back with your home country. So let's say I'm a citizen of Singapore. I'm a this isn't the STEM example, but let's just it's just the first one that comes to my mind. Let's say I'm a citizen of Singapore. I'm a tax accountant. I set up a business here in the US, and 50% of my clients are in Singapore, and I'm doing tax services for them. Or it's an import-export business. Let's say a manufacturing business, and you're trading, and you can show that 50% of the goods and services that are going back and forth could be is with that country. So there's two ways: investor or trader. And it is again, it's another tool. I try not to just default to the H-1B. Like I think, honestly, 20 years ago, 99% of the people I talked to would be F1, H-1B, employer-sponsored green card. It was all the same. Now we really do just think about every category for every person, because we really want to pick the best one, the one that's working best, the one that might be best for a spouse to be able to work, the one that might be the best pivot for a green card, if that's what you want.
Awesome. And since I lumped too many questions together, I'll circle back.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Yeah, could we also talk about the difference between O1 and EB1?
Yeah. So O1 is a temporary visa and EB1 is a green card, is permanent residence. So the O1 is for working now. The EB1 is based on a future job offer. They're very similar categories. They're about marketing you based on your work. And that Institute for Progress link that was shared earlier gives you some ideas on how to prepare for both of those. If you If you're on an O1, you probably have some good information to use to file an EB1. In general, a green card is a multi-year project. So if you have a stable temporary visa, then you can think about filing for permanent residence. And one of the things that article, that Institute for Progress article mentions is that in 2022, the US government really expanded what was public facing. So now there's a lot of information about exactly what the guidance for officers about exactly what they're looking for O1s and EB1s is there. You can read it. I go back to it all the time. I use it as my roadmap when I'm creating a case. And if you're interested in those categories, take a look.
Right. So we have another question about the 100K fee. Will the new H-1B 100K fee affect me if I change status from F1 STEM OPT to H-1B within the US, but later return to my home country to obtain the H-1B visa stamp?
No, it won't. That's been clarified recently.
Excellent. All right. In the proposed change to duration of status, when your status expires, would you have to reapply from your home country, or could you do so within the US?
You could do either. My worry is that either way, it's going to be a hassle and an extra expense and a delay, but you could do either.
Excellent. I like these rapid fire answers. So for OPT, is there a limit on how many hours you can work? Can you make extra money by doing extra tutoring, for example, or could you have a side hobby in the form of, say, a monetized YouTube channel?
Okay, so again, we need to separate out the first year of OPT and the second and third year of STEM OPT. For the first year of OPT, there's no maximum limit in the number of hours you can work. There's a minimum that you need to have at least 20 hours a week for a single employer. But you can do anything else you want as long as it's in your field. So, if you're a physics major and you're tutoring English, that's not gonna, or tutoring in your home, your native language, that's not going to be okay, but anything else that you do that's related to your field is okay. In terms of a monetized YouTube channel, I can tell you that the immigration regulations that were written in 1965 and 1990 didn't anticipate any of this stuff. So we don't really have completely clear guidance. I think in general, if you are doing something and getting paid for it, it's possible that an immigration officer could say that's work. And so I think the most conservative advice would be to say, don't monetize your YouTube channel unless you have specific work authorization. Like if you're doing a physics podcast or YouTube videos and you're monetizing that and you're on your first year of STEM OPT, I would say that's fine. But otherwise, like on an H-1B, that is making money without it. And maybe what you want to do is just decide for now you're not going to monetize it. And keep in mind if you're outside the US. So let's say you take a vacation and you go to your home country for a month and you post your YouTube, you create your YouTube content and post it then, that's okay because you are work authorized there, but not here.
I think we have time for just a few more questions. So can I get an extension on OPT for medical reasons?
No. So I think what that's asking is, can you get an extension on the time frame to apply? No. The only thing the time frame to apply is based on when you graduate, which is called your program end date. So if you have a medical issue, talk to your foreign student advisor, and maybe you could push back your graduation a little bit to give yourself to push back the deadline to apply for OPT.
All right. Then we had someone asking, I will be graduating with my PhD in March 2026, and my F1 visa is expiring in December 2025. Will this be a problem later if I don't get it renewed?
No, again, the renewal, the visa is really only for travel. So if you're not traveling, you don't need that visa. If you are traveling, you will need to make time to go to an embassy to get a new visa stamp.
Okay. And then I see in the chat we have a few more points of clarification about working on OPT. Is tutoring through any online platform okay during the first year of OPT? And can I use it to extend my OPT?
So again, if you're tutoring in your field or doing something related to your field, like, if you're an engineering major and you're tutoring in physics, I think that would be okay. So that you can do as long as you have the 20 hours a week for a single employer, you can do other work. To extend your OPT for the second and third year, it needs to be an employer-employee relationship. So if the online tutoring platform is based in the US and hires you and puts together a training plan for you, and you're doing at least 20 hours a week paid there, then that could be okay. But the second and third year of STEM OPT is more formal. It requires an employer-employee relationship.
All right, so now maybe a bit of a specific question. We have someone who has been stuck in 221G administrative processing for 2 years. They now have a postdoc offer and are hoping to apply for a J1. Does it make sense to apply before this processing is finished?
So I'm assuming that this person was waiting for a tourist visa to visit the US. And 221G is basically a security check. So this person is stuck in an extended security check. It could be because of the type of work the person's doing. It could be the type of background the person has. Like we'd see this sometimes with Iranian nationals or with people from China who attended a Chinese military university. There are a variety of reasons, and we can't always be sure why it's happening. But if somebody's been stuck in a security delay for 2 years on a different kind of visa, you can certainly apply again for the J1. There's a decent chance that whatever the issue was that's unresolved before is going to come up again, and this new visa could go into a security delay. There really isn't too much we can do. I know people try calling congressional offices, people try, having universities write to the embassy. There's really not too much they can do because those security delays are usually done in Washington with the FBI. The FBI has lost some funding and some staffing recently. So I think the only thing you can do in that case is apply for the J1 for the postdoc. Try to hope that talk to the university openly and see if they are flexible about when you start. If there's any piece of it, if it's not lab work, but if it's sort of data analysis, maybe you can start and do some work remotely to begin. But the only way to try to move this forward is through a lawsuit, and that's called mandamus. That means going to federal court and saying that this is taking too long. The government is doing something and it's taking too long. If the government is really worried for some reason, like if there is something in the background or the type of work that's being done, and they say that to the judge, it probably won't work. But a good part of the time, mandamus will kick a case into gear. We don't do this until it's been at least 6 months, though.
I think this will probably be our last question. So if my F1 visa expires while I am in the US, can I renew it here or do I have to renew it from my home country?
So unfortunately, you can't renew the visa in the US. It has to be done at a consulate abroad. There was a pilot program under the Biden administration to think about doing it here, but that just hasn't been continued. So you don't have to travel. You don't need to get a new visa, but if you do travel, you will have to get a new visa.
All right. Well, thank you, Dan, for being so generous with your time and your advice. And any final thoughts that you'd like to share?
Just, we've really been diving into the details. I hope, I wish all the best for you. I hope you have a great experience here. We'll try to work together to get information out to you. And again, I'll say it one more time, listen to your foreign student advisors, read those emails. There may be something new in a week or a month or a year. And keep in mind also that there are a lot of organizations like APS, like a lot of the higher ed organizations that are advocating, as Francis said, and really, sharing the importance of having you all here in the US, both for our workforce and just for the excitement of having international students in the country. So there are a lot of people who are working to support you, and we're going to keep doing that.
Well, in addition to thanking Dan, we want to thank all of you that are online and participating in the webinar and have joined us today from various time zones across the globe. We hope this has been helpful to you, and please share this information with your friends and your colleagues. And just a final reminder, please look for that email that includes our survey and a link to our resources page, and it will have a link to this webinar as well. So your friends who couldn't be there today can listen to it and get all of this wonderful advice. So again, please know how much we appreciate all of you, and Dan, we cannot thank you enough. So with that, this concludes our webinar, and on behalf of the American Physical Society, please keep in touch. We look forward to working together.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.